There are places in this world where curiosity can be deadly, where one wrong step, one careless action, can awaken something older and hungrier than you can imagine. Tonight, we travel through the Appalachian wilderness, through the darkness of the night, the whispers of the folklore, and the undeniable feeling of fear that lurks there. Make sure to not look away. You may miss something important. But above all, make sure you leave the light on. I lived my entire life in a holler on the outskirts of Wyoming County, West Virginia, deep in the mountains of Appalachia. It's a place so remote most folks don't even know it exists on a map. Just a handful of families in dense, unforgiving woods. This place doesn't have neighborhoods, doesn't have sidewalks, and most definitely does not have trick-or-treaters on Halloween. Halloween isn't a holiday here, it's a test. My family, and the others who lived here long enough to know, follow a set of rules on Halloween night. It's not tradition or superstition, it's survival. Those who didn't follow the rules didn't live long enough to tell anyone about it. Our rules aren't just about keeping doors locked or avoiding dark places. They're specific, with reasons rooted in events we don't talk about. My dad always said they came from my great-grandmother's time, when people came to these mountains from Scotland and still believed in the old ways. Whether it's spirits or something else that's out there, or things just too old to name, Halloween night here has always been a game of life and death. And each rule existed to give you just enough of an edge to make it through till morning. The first time I broke a rule, I learned why they exist, and I'll never forget it. Every October, around the second week, the rules went up on the fridge. We lived by them. My family took them seriously, and not just in a keep the kids safe kind of way. No, these rules were for everyone. Break one, and you'd put us all in danger. Here's how they go. If you hear 3 knocks at the door after sunset, do not answer. If you hear a single, hard knock, open the door, but do not look at who stands there. Hold out a basket of freshly baked bread and wait until you hear the footsteps leaving to shut the door. If you hear someone call your name from the woods, do not answer. If you see a figure at the tree line wearing a wide-brimmed hat, do not look at him for longer than 1 second. If you hear chains dragging on the ground, sprinkle salt on all windowsills and door thresholds within 1 minute. If a candle is burning in the window of the old abandoned Anderson cabin up the hill, stay indoors, no matter what. These rules didn't exist for no reason. They were handed down because bad things had happened. People vanished. People died. And strange things occurred. That's just how it was. I remember one specific year, years back, when Halloween night fell on a full moon. The air felt different, charged. My dad had a sense for when things were going to be bad. You could just feel it in the holler, thick in the air, like something breathing down your neck. Dad told us to get all the preparations done early.
Salt the windows, now.
He instructed, standing by the door, his face tight with worry.
We're not waiting for the chains.
I followed his orders without question, pouring salt along each windowsill and at the front and back door thresholds. My brother was baking bread, already anticipating rule number 2, the one we hated the most. It was the one that forced us to interact with whatever knocked, whatever stood on the other side of that door. We never knew who or what it was, but we knew if you didn't offer bread, or if you dared to look, it wouldn't be good. By late afternoon, the house was fortified. The bread was cooling on the counter, its smell filling the kitchen. The fire was lit, burning low, and a 12 gauge lay across Dad's lap, like it always did on Halloween. Isaac, my younger brother, sat closest to the window, glancing out every now and then. We had about 3 hours before sunset. The rules were clear. Everything bad happened after dark. But the waiting was the worst part. The longer we sat there, the more anxious we became.
Did we use enough salt this year?
Isaac asked, quietly. Dad didn't answer. He just stared into the fire, gripping the gun tighter. That was answer enough. The first knock came just after dark. A single knock. Slow and deliberate. Isaac and I froze, staring at the door. Dad stood up, motioning for us to stay back and be quiet. I swallowed hard, heart pounding in my chest. It was time to follow Rule 2. Without a word, Dad picked up the basket of bread from the counter, freshly baked, still warm. He walked to the door, resting one hand on the knob.
Remember,
he said, his voice low and steady.
Don't look.
He opened the door just wide enough to slip the basket through the crack, his eyes focused on the floor. The warm smell of the bread wafted out, and I could hear a faint shuffling on the porch. Whoever, or whatever it was out there. I saw a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye, a shadow stretching across the porch, but I didn't dare look. Dad held the basket out, his hand shaking slightly. For a few heartbeats, there was no sound, no movement. And then, footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps retreating from the porch. He waited until they faded completely, then shut the door quietly, locking it tight. Isaac let out a breath.
Why don't we leave the bread out early? Why do we have to wait for the knock?
Dad's face was pale, and his eyes were hard.
We have to wait for the knock. And if we don't answer the knock, it'll come in.
We thought it was over. We had followed Rule 2 to the letter, and for a moment, it seemed like things were quiet. But here, nothing stays quiet for long on Halloween. Isaac was the first to notice him. He was standing at the edge of the woods, just where the trees meet the clearing. He was tall and thin, a wide-brimmed hat casting his face in shadow. He didn't move, didn't make a sound, but he was there, watching. Isaac gasped, pointing.
It's him,
he whispered, voice trembling. Dad didn't need to ask who. He knew. We all did. The man in the hat.
Don't look at him.
Dad snapped.
Not for more than a second.
I glanced, just enough to confirm he was there. A tall, dark figure, almost blending into the shadows of the trees, but distinct enough to make my blood run cold. I looked away quickly, heart hammering in my chest. We got away from the doors and windows of the house and sat huddled in the living room, the fire our only light. Outside, the man in the hat stood at the tree line, unmoving as the night crept on. It wasn't until after midnight that we heard the chains. At first, it was faint, a metallic clinking that seemed distant, almost like it could have been the wind. But it grew louder, closer, until it was unmistakable. The sound of chains being dragged across the rocky ground outside. Isaac's face turned pale. He shot me a look, wide-eyed and terrified.
The salt.
He whispered. Dad nodded grimly.
Go check.
I got up slowly, trying to control the tremor in my legs. I circled the house, inspecting every window and door frame. The salt lines were intact. Nothing had disturbed them. The chains continued to scrape outside, dragging closer and closer. But we didn't dare open the door. We didn't dare look. We stayed inside, sitting together in the flickering light of the fire, listening to the sound of the chains until the first light of dawn broke through the windows. We made it through the night. The man in the hat was gone. The chains had stopped. But as the morning light seeped through the shutters, I glanced toward the old Anderson cabin up the hill. And there it was. A single candle still burning in the window. The rules are clear. When the candle burns in the Anderson cabin, you stay inside. No exceptions. No excuses. Even with the sun beginning to shine, and the birds beginning to chirp, the sight of the candle filled me with a primal fear. We have to wait until the candle goes out before we can go outside. Before the night is truly over. And that's how it goes here. The rules aren't just there to be followed. They're there to keep you alive. And if you're smart, you don't ask questions. Sometimes, it's better not to know. Halloween here had always been terrifying. But last year was different. It wasn't just the usual unease or the normal anxiety that came with the setting sun. It almost felt like the rules weren't enough anymore. My dad was getting older, his movements slower, his hands a little less steady. We all knew it, but no one said anything. We just followed the rules like always, hoping that would be enough. We spent the day in preparation, salting the windows, baking the bread, the usual. Isaac and I were jittery, pacing around, double-checking everything. With my dad getting older, we felt a greater pressure to take it upon ourselves to prepare. The sky darkened faster than usual, clouds rolling in from the west, blotting out the last rays of the sun. By the time dusk fell, the fire was burning low, and the house sat in darkness. Dad sat in his usual spot by the door, the shotgun across his lap. The basket of bread, fresh out of the oven, sat next to him. We all waited, our hearts pounding in the silence. I kept glancing at the windows, expecting to see the figure in the hat or hear the drag of chains. And then it came. A single knock, loud and deliberate. Dad stood up, just like every other year.
Stay put,
he muttered, picking up the basket with his trembling hands. His face was pale, but his voice was steady. Isaac and I exchanged a nervous glance as Dad approached the door. As always, I stared at the floor, focusing on the sound crackling fire, and trying to block out the sense of dread that had settled in my gut. He opened the door a crack, just enough to push the basket through, without seeing whatever waited on the other side. But this time, something went wrong. As Dad leaned forward, he knocked the basket against the doorframe and lost his grip. The bread tumbled out, scattering across the porch. The sudden movement, the noise. Without thinking, I looked up. I looked at it, and I saw it. It wasn't a man. It wasn't anything I could name. It stood hunched over, far too tall to be human. Its limbs were unnaturally long. its skin pale and stretched tight over bones that jutted out at odd angles. Its face was sunken, like a skull with pale white skin pulled tight over it, and its eyes were wild and wide, too wide, like it didn't have eyelids. Its mouth opened unnaturally wide, a black, gaping hole that emitted a horrible, deafening wail. It was a sound I had never heard before, like metal scraping against stone, but worse. It drilled into my brain, making my ears ring and my vision blur. Before I could react, before I could even scream, the thing lunged. Its bony hand shot out, grabbing my dad by the collar. In one terrifying quick motion, it yanked him off the porch, dragging him toward the woods. The sound of his body scraping against the ground, his muffled cries, and the creature's horrible wail all blurred together into a scene of pure terror. Isaac screamed first. I was frozen, my mind unable to comprehend what had just happened. But Isaac's scream jolted me back to reality.
Dad!
Isaac yelled, bolting for the door. I followed, my legs shaking and my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. We ran out into the cold night air, toward the edge of the woods where we could still hear Dad's faint cries. But before we could take more than a few steps, I saw it. The candle. A single flickering light in the window of the old Anderson cabin. My blood ran cold. We'd come outside when the candle was burning. I grabbed Isaac's arm, pulling him to a stop. "Wait," I whispered, voice shaking. "The cabin." As if on cue, the door of the cabin suddenly flew open with a loud crash, as if something unseen was about to come storming out. Something angry. Something that should not have been awakened. "We have to go!" I shouted, dragging Isaac back toward our house. We scrambled inside, slamming the door shut behind us. I locked it, my hands trembling so badly I could barely turn the key. The shotgun was still on the floor by Dad's chair, but it felt useless. What good would it do against something like that? But the night was far from over. We huddled in the living room, terrified, waiting for the next rule to break. Isaac was crying, his hands shaking as he tried to steady his breathing. I stared at the door, half expecting something to come crashing through at any moment. The chains came next. We heard them clattering on the ground, dragging closer and closer. I grabbed the bag of salt, getting ready to double-check the lines of salt we had placed down earlier. The chains dragged right up to the front door, the metallic clinking echoing in the silence. I could hear it just outside, scraping against the wooden steps of the porch, but I knew the salt would hold. It always did. Or so I thought. Isaac was the first to notice it. We had forgotten to resalt the front door threshold after going outside. The wind from the open door had disturbed our salt line. Just as I was about to rush toward the door to resalt it, I heard the chains and a creaking against the door. It sounded as though a heavy weight was slowly leaning against it. I knew we didn't have time. I began to back away, motioning to Isaac to go to the bedroom. Isaac screamed as the door burst open. We ran into the back bedroom, hearts pounding, breaths coming in ragged gasps. I quickly salted in front of the door to the bedroom and checked the windows. "It's in the house," I whispered. I could feel it, a presence, something cold and malevolent, creeping through the house towards us. I don't know how long we waited, or how long we listened to the chains pacing back and forth through our house. Eventually, we heard them go back outside. Slowly, we left the bedroom and quietly closed and locked the front door. I placed a fresh line of salt in front of the door and breathed a sigh of relief. We were safe. For now. But then we heard it again. A knock. But not the single knock. And not the 3 knocks. This was something new. Something that didn't fit the rules. It was a rapid, frantic pounding. As if whatever was out there wanted in now. My heart stopped. The rules didn't cover this. Isaac looked at me, eyes wide with terror.
What do we do?
I didn't have an answer. The pounding grew louder, more desperate. The windows rattled in their frames, and the fire flickered, casting wild shadows on the walls. Whatever was out there was angry, angrier than anything I had ever felt before. "We just wait," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the noise. "We wait until daylight." The rest of the night was a blur of terror. Every minute felt like an hour. Every sound made my heart leap into my throat. We didn't sleep. We didn't dare move from the living room. We huddled together in front of the fire, clutching the shotgun like it was our last hope, and quietly crying over the loss of our father. The pounding on the door never stopped. The chains outside the house dragged back and forth, a constant reminder of the horror that waited just beyond the walls. And through it all, the candle in the Anderson cabin burned bright, flickering in the distance like a beacon of death. But somehow, we made it. By the time the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, the sound stopped. The pounding ceased. The chains fell silent. The candle in the cabin flickered out. We had survived another year. Barely. But Dad never came back. Halloween in our holler had always been a test. But last year, it wasn't enough. Breaking the rules cost my dad his life, and everything is different. And I can't shake the feeling that this Halloween will be worse. We found a cave on my grandmother's property. What's inside needs to stay hidden forever. I was 17 the summer we found the cave on my grandmother's property in eastern Kentucky. I've never told this story to anyone. Not my wife. Not a therapist. Nobody. Sealing the cave after Grandma Edith passed should have helped, but it did not. What Chester and I saw down there has never let go of me. I was what you call the nerdy kid back then. Thick glasses, skinny as a rail, the type who spent lunch periods in the library. Every summer, my parents shipped me off to Grandma Edith's farmhouse in the foothills of the Appalachians, figuring the mountain air would be good for me. The house was everything a city kid like me thought was cool about the country. High ceilings, creaky wooden floors, wraparound porches, and dense forest in every direction. The nearest neighbor was Chester's family, and their place was nearly a mile down the dirt road. Past that, nothing but trees and hollers until you reached the country highway. Chester was a year younger than me, and he was everything I wasn't. He could fix engines, hunt, fish, and navigate the woods like he'd been born to it. Where I was pale and awkward, Chester was sun-darkened and confident. Where I worried about everything, Chester just did things. We'd become friends the summer before, mostly because we were the only kids for miles, and boredom breaks down barriers. He taught me to shoot his BB gun and which berries were safe to eat. I helped him with his summer reading and showed him how to use his family's ancient computer. "John, you worry too much," he'd say when I hesitated at creek crossings or complained about spiderwebs. "It's just the woods. Ain't nothing out here gonna hurt you." I wanted to believe him. Chester made the forest feel like his backyard, and his confidence was infectious. Around him, I felt braver than I actually was. That summer, we were both restless in the way teenagers get when the days are long and the possibilities seem endless. We already built a rope swing over the creek, explored every deer trail, even tried to build a treehouse that collapsed before we got the roof on. We needed something new, something bigger. We just had no idea what we were about to find. We found it in the 3rd week of July, during a brutal heat wave that made the air shimmer and even drove the birds into shade. Chester and I were wandering the property, desperate for something to break the monotony. "Man, there's gotta be something we ain't explored yet," Chester said, wiping sweat from his forehead. We were on the ridge at the back of Grandma's land, where the trees were thick and the underbrush hadn't been touched in decades. "Maybe the creek again?" I suggested, though we'd been there twice already that week. "Nah, that's boring. We need something new." Chester stopped and pointed. "What's that?" I squinted. Through the foliage, I saw a darker shadow, something that didn't fit the natural pattern of trunks and branches. I squinted where he was pointing. Through the dense foliage, I could make out what looked like a darker shadow among the trees, something that didn't quite fit the natural pattern of trunks and branches. We shoved through brush, scratched by thorns and wrapped in spiderwebs. Chester led the way while I followed and complained about the bugs. "Quit whining," he called. "You want to find something cool or not?" In the hillside, we found a depression about 15 feet across, and at its center, the mouth of a cave, half covered by a rusted iron grate. Time and weather had rusted most of it away, leaving gaps just big enough for nosy teenagers to squeeze through. "Holy crap," Chester breathed. The first time I'd ever heard him sound impressed. "John, look at this." I crept closer. The opening vanished into blackness, a cool breeze drifting out with the smell of damp earth and something I couldn't place. "Think it's an old mine?" I asked. Chester shook his head. "Nah, wrong kind of rock. Limestone country." "It's a cave. A real cave." He was already kneeling at the gap, peering into the dark. "We should tell my grandmother," I said. "She'd just tell us to stay away." He grinned, the kind of grin that meant trouble. "Come on, just a quick look." "We don't have lights." "My phone does." I wanted to argue, but Chester was already squeezing through the gap. His movement echoed strangely inside. "Chester, wait up," I called. Being alone outside seemed worse than following. "Just for a minute," his voice came back, muffled and strange. "Just to see what's here." I slipped through after him, scraping my shoulder on the rusted metal. The passage opened immediately into a chamber 10 feet high and twice as wide. Chester's phone light swept over smooth limestone carved by water through the ages. "This is so cool," Chester whispered, and his voice echoed back at us from deeper in the cave. The floor was mostly level, covered with a layer of dirt and small rocks that crunched under our feet. Chester played his light ahead, revealing that the cave continued back into the hillside much further than either of us had expected. "Okay, we looked," I said. "Now let's go back and get real flashlights if we want to explore." But Chester was already moving deeper, his phone light bobbing as he walked. "Chester! Just a little further," he called back. "I want to see how far it goes." I followed. The alternative was standing alone in the cave mouth, and that wasn't happening. We made it 50 feet before Chester's phone died. The darkness swallowed us whole, the kind you never get in a city. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. "Chester?" My voice sounded small. "Right here, don't panic." His hand grabbed my arm. "Stay close. We'll follow the wall back." We shuffled for 5 minutes along the wall, trying not to trip. When daylight finally appeared, we were both shaking, though neither admitted it. Though I heard the relief in his voice. "It goes back really far," I said. "Yeah, we need real lights and rope. Explore it properly." I nodded, though something about the cave felt off. Maybe it was the darkness, or the way our voices echoed. "Tomorrow," Chester said, "we'll come back with supplies." As we walked back through the woods toward the house, I kept looking over my shoulder at the cave mouth behind us. Even with the afternoon sun filtering through the trees, that dark opening seemed to pull at my attention. I should have listened to that feeling. Should have told Grandma Edith, or just found something else to occupy our time that summer. But I was 17, and Chester made everything seem like an adventure, even the things that should have scared us away. We came back the next morning loaded like explorers. Chester had his dad's heavy flashlight, a coil of rope, and glow sticks from his birthday. I brought a headlamp, extra batteries, chalk for marking our path, and a notebook to map it. "You sure like to be prepared," Chester said at the cave entrance. "Better than getting lost." He was already squeezing through the gap. "We won't get lost. We got lights this time." With real light, the cave felt different. What had seemed mysterious in the dim glow of Chester's phone now looked like a normal limestone cavern. Water had carved smooth channels into the walls, and the floor sloped gently down as we moved deeper. "This is way bigger than I thought," Chester said, sweeping his light around. Several passages branched off, each fading in darkness. We spent an hour exploring the obvious routes, marking chalk arrows and dropping glow sticks. Chester sketched a rough map while I called out measurements. "Left passage goes about 60 feet and dead ends," I said. "Right passage curves back and connects with the center, like a loop." The center passage drew us in. It ran straight back, sloping steadily down, and our lights couldn't find the end. "That's where we need to go," Chester said, his voice excited. 2 hours in, he made the observation that should have sent us back. "You notice anything weird about this place?" he asked, studying the walls. "What do you mean?" "No bats, no bugs, nothing." His light swept the ceiling and walls. "Every cave should have bats at least. Spiders, crickets, something. But look, nothing." I stopped and looked. He was right. The place was sterile. No cobwebs, no droppings, no life. Even the puddles were clear and still, with none of the algae you'd expect. "Maybe it's too far from the entrance?" I said. Chester shook his head. "Nah, caves are ecosystems. There should be something living here." We kept going. We were too caught up in the adventure to let a little oddity stop us. The cave was giving up its secrets, and we felt invincible. The center passage dropped 100 feet over 300 yards. Our chalk marks and glow sticks glowed faintly behind us. Then, Chester spotted the elevated passage. "John, look up there!" I followed his flashlight beam to where the wall rose to our right. About 15 feet up was another opening. Unlike the others, it was perfectly round, 4 feet across, with a steady current of air flowing out. "Feel that breeze?" Chester said, moving closer to the wall. I felt it. Cool, mossy, damp, but with something else underneath. Something I couldn't place. "We can't reach it," I said. "Not today, but with a ladder or rope." He was already planning our next trip. I stared at the dark hole, uneasy. The air was too cold, carrying scents that didn't belong in limestone. "I think we should head back," I said. "We'd been down here a while." Chester checked his phone. "Yeah, past lunch. Your grandma's probably wondering." We followed our chalk arrows and glow sticks back to the surface. Faster this time. Sunlight hit like a flood, and I had to squint against it. "Tomorrow, we bring a ladder," Chester said. "Maybe we should tell someone where we're going," I suggested, "in case something happens." He gave me that look again, the one that said I worried too much. "Nothing's gonna happen. It's just a cave." But as we walked through the woods, I kept thinking about the opening and the air flowing from it. The scent felt familiar, like something half-remembered from a dream. That night, I dreamed of deep places and moving air, and woke with the taste of moss in my mouth. Chester showed up the next morning with his dad's aluminum stepladder strapped to the four-wheeler, grinning like he had solved everything. "Borrowed it while Dad was at work," he said, wrestling it off. "He won't miss it for a few hours." The ladder was heavier than it looked, and hauling it through the woods was an expedition in itself. We stopped every 50 yards to rest and untangle it from branches. By the time we reached the cave, we were both sweating. "This better be worth it," I muttered, helping him force it through the gate. "Trust me, it will." Getting the ladder down the sloping passage was another challenge. It was awkward in the tight space, and my headlamp cast confusing shadows. But Chester was determined, and we finally got it against the wall. "Hold it steady," he said, climbing. I braced it while his light swept the opening above. At the top, he went quiet. "What do you see?" I called. "It goes back a long way," he said, muffled. He climbed down and we switched places. The ladder felt shaky under me, but I reached the opening. His flashlight had shown the tunnel stretching back, but what struck me was the sound. Water. Dripping. Echoing as if from a much larger space. "You hear that?" I called. "Yeah, sounds like water. A lot of it." I climbed down, and we stared at each other in the glow of our lights. "Underground river?" I said. "Or a lake. Only one way to find out." The elevated passage was more open than I expected. We could walk upright. The walls smooth limestone worn by water. The smell grew stronger as we moved, and the air felt thicker, carrying scents that reminded me of things long dead. After 200 feet, the passage opened. I've spent years trying to find words for what we saw, and I still cannot do it justice. The cavern was vast, the size of a cathedral, with walls fading into darkness. In the center was a lake. The water was black and still, like a mirror reflecting nothing. Our lights reached only a few inches, and when Chester tossed in a pebble, the ripples died too quickly, as if the water swallowed them. "Jesus," Chester breathed, his voice echoing from the ceiling above. I swept my headlamp around the edges. The far shore was almost beyond reach, maybe 50 feet away. "How deep do you think it is?" Chester asked. "I don't know. Deep." He was already digging in his pack. "Let's find out." He cracked a glow stick, tied it to a rock with a rubber band, and tossed it in. The green light sank, and sank, and sank. It never reached bottom. The glow vanished into distance until the surface was black again, showing no trace of what we had dropped. "That's not possible," Chester said, his confidence gone. I stepped back from the edge. The lake felt alien, the air too still, the silence too complete. Even our voices seemed muffled, as if the water absorbed them. "We should go back," I said. But Chester was staring at the far shore, his light barely catching shapes in the dark. "There's something over there," he said. "On the other side." I looked. In the faint circle of light, I saw what might have been structures on the rock. Regular shapes that did not look natural. "Chester, let's go back and think about this." "We need a boat," he said, ignoring me. "An inflatable raft. We could paddle over." The thought of being on that water clenched my stomach. "That's crazy. We don't even know how deep it is. What if we fall in?" "We won't. I'm a good swimmer." "In a lake that might not have a bottom?" He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw he felt it too. The sense we had found something that should not exist. But Chester never backed down from anything. "Tomorrow," he said. "We'll think tonight and come back with a plan." As we left through the passage and down the ladder, I kept looking back. The darkness seemed deeper than it should, and I felt something in the water watching. That night, I could not shake the image of the glow stick sinking into endless depths. In my dreams, I sank with it into darkness so complete I could not tell if my eyes were open or closed. Chester showed up the next afternoon with a small inflatable raft strapped to his four-wheeler, the kind meant for lazy rivers. He also had life jackets, waterproof flashlights, and a hand pump. "Where'd you get this?" I asked, though I already knew. "Borrowed it from my cousin Jake. He won't miss it." I eyed the raft. It was 6 feet long, built for calm water, not underground lakes. "Chester, I don't think that's gonna work. It'll be fine. It's rated for 2 people. We're light." Despite my doubts, I helped him haul it to the cave. His enthusiasm was hard to resist, and I was curious about the far shore. But the image of that glow stick sinking into black water never left my mind. Launching took longer than we expected. The rocky shore wasn't ideal, and we had to clear stones for a spot. The whole time I was aware of the water beside us, still as obsidian and reflecting our lights. "You sure about this?" I asked. "It's just water. Worst case, we get wet." But it wasn't just the water, and we both knew it. The lake was unnaturally still. No lapping at the shore. No movement at all. Even when disturbed, the ripples died too fast, as if the water was heavier than it looked. Chester climbed in first with a flashlight. The raft barely dented the surface, as if it floated on something solid. "Come on," he said, steadying it. I climbed in reluctantly, paddle in hand. The moment we pushed off, I felt the lake take hold of us. It wasn't like floating, more like being suspended over an abyss. "Paddle," Chester said, shining his light ahead. The rowing was strange. The water gave almost no resistance, yet the raft crawled forward, slower than it should have. It was like paddling through oil, though the water looked and felt normal when I touched it. "This is taking forever," Chester muttered, after what felt like 20 minutes. I looked back and my stomach dropped. The rocky ledge was much farther away than it should have been, barely visible in our glow. Ahead of us, the far shore seemed no closer than when we'd started. "Chester, something's not right about this." "Just keep paddling. We're almost there." But we weren't. The harder we paddled, the less progress we made. The far shore stayed distant while the shore behind us kept receding. It was as if the lake stretched itself, bending distance in ways that defied sense. Then Chester's light touched the far side and we both went quiet. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. "I don't know, but I don't like it." The structure was 30 feet across, ringed with strange stone pillars. The rock was darker than limestone, smooth and almost metallic. Carved channels ran toward the water, and in the center stood something like an altar, though it was built for no human shape I could imagine. "We need to get closer," Chester said, but without his usual confidence. "No, we need to go back, now." I turned the raft, but he grabbed my arm. "Wait! Look at the water." I followed his gaze. The water glowed faintly, as if light rose from something far below. The glow was subtle but unmistakable. The surface shifted, a slow bulge rising as though some unseen current was pushing up from the depths. "There's something down there," Chester said. "Something big." Then our gear failed. Chester's flashlight flickered and died. My headlamp dimmed despite fresh batteries. Even my watch froze at 3:47. "Chester, we're leaving, now," I said, cracking a glow stick. He didn't argue. We paddled hard toward what we thought was shore, but the darkness pressed in and our failing light showed almost nothing beyond the raft. Then we heard it. A sound from beneath us, deep and resonant, like rock and metal groaning under pressure. It rose from the depths and vibrated through the water and into our bones. Ripples spread across the surface and faded too quickly. The raft shuddered. "Paddle faster," Chester said, and for the first time, I heard fear in his voice. The sound came again. Closer. The water around us began to glow, the light moving upward as if something vast was rising. We paddled in silence, our failing lights barely cutting the dark. The shore seemed impossibly far, and with every stroke, I was sure we would not make it. But somehow we did. The raft scraped the rocks just as my headlamp died. We dragged it out and collapsed on the cavern floor, shaking in the shine of our last glow stick. "We can't tell anyone," Chester said finally. "They'd think we were crazy." I nodded, though part of me wondered if we were. The whole thing felt like a nightmare. As we packed up, I made the mistake of looking back. The water was still again, but I was certain something in that blackness was looking at us. For 3 days, I avoided the cave. I stayed close to the house, helped Grandma with chores, even started reading one of her old romance novels just to keep busy. But Chester would not let it go. He showed up with a restless energy I had never seen. "You can't just pretend it didn't happen," he said one Thursday morning on the porch. "We found something incredible." "We found something dangerous," I said. "Our lights failed, Chester, all of them, at the same time. So we bring backups, more batteries, better lights." I looked at him and realized what I had mistaken for confidence was obsession. He could not sit still. Dark circles under his eyes showed he was not sleeping. "I need to go back," he said, leaning forward. "Don't you want to know what it was?" "No, I don't." Chester stood and paced to the edge of the porch. "Fine, then I'll go alone." "You can't. Watch me." I felt trapped between two choices. Let Chester go alone, or return to something I wanted to forget. The thought of him down there by himself was worse than my fear. "If I go with you," I said, "we go at dawn. We bring extra everything. And at the first sign of trouble, we leave. No arguments." Chester grinned, hollow. "Deal." That afternoon we gathered supplies. Chester had found a larger raft, more stable than the first, borrowed from my sister's boyfriend. We packed flashlights, batteries, glow sticks, rope, even a first aid kit. Looking back, it was an expedition, not an adventure. "One more thing," Chester said as we loaded the four-wheeler. "I want to actually reach the far shore this time. Get a closer look." Every instinct screamed no, but I had committed. And despite my fear, I was curious. The shapes we had seen haunted my dreams. I needed to know. The forest felt different on the way back. Quieter. Even the birds were silent. We slipped through the grate and down to the lake, our equipment heavier with every step. The cavern was as we left it, vast and still. The water stretched into darkness, smooth as glass. Against every survival instinct, I helped him launch the boat. The crossing dragged, and with each stroke, I was more certain we were making a mistake. But something was different about the far shore. "Are those lights?" I asked, squinting. Chester raised the binoculars and went still. "There's something over there." "What?" "On the far shore. I see movement. And you're right, there are lights. Not flashlights. Something else. Something that glows." I snatched the binoculars. In the distance, a faint blue-green glow flickered, like the bioluminescence in the water. "Chester, we're turning around. Right now," I said, handing them back. My voice was a hoarse whisper. He looked through them again and gasped. Chester had gone completely silent. His mouth moved, but no words came at first. Then, in a whisper that grew louder, he began repeating. It comes out of the water, it goes into the water. It comes out of the water, it goes into the water. I shook him, but he wouldn't stop. His eyes were fixed on the far shore, wide and shining, as though he was watching something emerge that I couldn't yet see. That's when the water around us began to glow. Luminescence rose from the depths, like we'd seen before, but this time it was brighter, more intense. And in that growing light, I could see the true scale of what lay beneath the water. It wasn't a lake at all. It wasn't a lake. It went down forever. An eye, a well, a portal, an abyss eternal and bottomless, vast and deep, alien light forever and ever. I screamed. I know I screamed because my throat was raw afterward, but I couldn't hear the sound over the roar of blood in my ears. Chester was screaming too. Or maybe laughing. I couldn't tell which. The eye blinked. The entire cavern shuddered as something the size of a mountain moved beneath us. Water that wasn't water displaced around us, and our tiny raft was suddenly riding waves that shouldn't exist in an underground space. This shook Chester out of his fugue. We both dug our paddles into the glowing surface, fighting against currents that felt more like muscle contractions than water flow. As we stumbled out of the boat onto the shore, I made the mistake of looking back. The eye was there, staring up at us through bottomless layers of water that should have blocked any light. And in that ancient gaze, I saw recognition. It saw us. It saw into us and through us. Something in Chester's mind shattered. I could see it in his eyes. I grabbed him and dragged him down the tunnel. We abandoned the raft and ran for the passage, leaving our carefully gathered equipment scattered on the cavern floor. Up through the elevated passage, down the ladder we didn't even bother to retrieve, through the cave system toward the blessed light of day. We burst from the cave into afternoon sunlight that felt impossibly bright and clean. Chester collapsed immediately, retching onto the forest floor. I managed to stay upright long enough to drag him away from the cave entrance before my own legs gave out. Chester was never the same after that day. His laugh, the easy confidence that used to pull me along into trouble, all of it vanished. He hardly spoke. And when he did, it was whispers about water and eyes that never stopped watching. Before the summer was over, his parents sent him away to a hospital in the big city. Someplace special, they said, though they never used the word I knew they meant. I never saw him again. At first, I thought he'd come back the next summer, that we'd pick up where we left off like nothing had happened. But his absence became permanent, a hollow space I couldn't fill. I carried the weight of it alone, pretending normal life was still possible while the memory pressed against me like the dark water under the hills. That was 10 years ago. I've been in therapy on and off ever since, cycling through doctors who nod sympathetically when I tell them about reoccurring nightmares of black water and watching eyes. They prescribe medications for anxiety and sleep disorders, but nothing stops the dreams completely. Chester wasn't as lucky. The last I heard, he was living on the streets, talking to things that weren't there and insisting that something was still watching him. When Grandma Edith passed a year ago and left me the house, the first thing I did was hire a contractor to seal the cave entrance with concrete and rebar. I told him it was a safety hazard. I paid him extra to use twice as much concrete as necessary and to never mention the job to anyone. Late at night, I swear that sometimes I can still hear the sound of water moving far beneath the ground.
Some warnings are not just superstition. In the Appalachian wilderness, disrespect the bones
and you might not just hear the howls. They might be the last thing you ever hear. Remember, the forest is watching, and it never forgets. So when night falls, tread carefully and leave the light on.